Okay, welcome everybody to episode 7 of the MTG Rebellion Rebelcast. This is a post Pizzabox performance by one of our very own Darth Riktus the Dark Stream, so we're going to get to that in just a second. We're also today going to talk about the standard meta. We've got bans coming. May 29th is the date. And we're going to talk about our ideas on that, what we think is getting banned. We're pretty sure about 1 or 2 cards, but, you know, it really could be a 3-card, 4-card ban. So we're going to take a look at that and just talk about the meta. How is everybody? We've got John Ramos, MTG, and Darth Riktus of the Dark Stream with us today. How are you, John Ramos?
We're good. We're good. Ready to talk Magic as usual.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And Darth Riktus, how are you coming off of that top 8 performance? How did you feel about that?
Oh, victory would have tasted sweeter, but getting to the finals felt pretty good.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. I have the top 8 for the tournament. Hold up. Pizzabox happened yesterday. And look, it says second place right next to your name in Selesnya Aggro. We were just talking about the technicalities on that. How really Selesnya was the best deck there. You just didn't come out ahead based on the games and how they played out. So talk to us about what happened.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to be dead honest with you. I didn't know that Selesnya was going to be that good. I kind of had a weird idea for how to build it at the last second. And literally 30 minutes before the tournament, I was convinced I was going to play Domain. And then I looked at the time and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I'm audibling to Selesnya, and audible's almost always the incorrect move, but it turns out there was a bit of a heater on this one. So it worked out nicely, and it was well positioned to punish Grixis midrange, Rakdos breach, all the builds of Rakdos and Grixis really is what it was built to punish. And I think we ended up going overall nearly 7. I think it was 7-1. So like out of the 11 rounds played, 8 of them were Grixis or Rakdos variants, and we ended up 7-1 against them.
Whoa, that's huge. Okay, all right. We have to talk about this, and that's really why I delayed the podcast until today. I'm gonna release it tonight. So, why do you think that is? Why do you think this deck overperformed against that mid-range archetype?
Mostly because they are so focused, or at least they were going into this weekend, on beating the mirror match that they forgot what they need to have in their sideboard to beat a deck like this. If you're playing green white Enchantress, which is what I call it, you need Gix's Command. Gix's Command is terrifying for my deck. But if you don't have Gix's Command, it gets a lot easier, a lot faster. Like Sunfall, also terrifying. I'm more scared of Domain as a ramp deck than I am of Grixis or Rakdos, which is weird as an aggro deck.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, we had been talking about in our recent sideboard guides how we always include domain because that's that is a meta deck, and domain control in particular doing its thing. Gix's command being the necessary counter that you need for decks with black. Why do you think Gix's command is seeing less play? Do you think this was just a particularity of the tournament meta that you faced on Sunday, or do you think this is going to be, if they released a pro tour this week, that it would happen like that again? Or is this just a skill level difference among players in how they deck build and prepare for tournaments?
I mean, everybody's got different ideas on how to build Grixis and Rakdos, but the slots can't change too much. You've got to maintain a certain number of slots, and then you have a certain number of flex slots. And in those flex slots, what I've been seeing is Glistening Deluge, Lithomantic Barrage, and it's not that these cards are terrible. It's just that realizing in a green white Enchantress deck where you have Teachings of Corinne, where you have Wedding Announcement, they get a lot less effective. Like Glistening Deluge can still be terrifying if it's played right on curve. But if I get ahead on, counters on Cammy, counters via Generous Visitor on things, all of a sudden we start to ignore it. And if you watch some of the replays from Pizzabox, what you will see is me playing around that to a degree where I have the option to make, a concentric board of like 3/3s, and I purposefully bump one of them up to a 4/4 and leave another one at like 2/2 to make sure if Glistening Deluge hits, I don't lose everything. Now, it didn't end up happening, but I had to play around specific sequences because I was worried about that issue.
Right. The limit on the what we call baby wipes, Brotherhood's End, Glistening Deluge is 3 toughness. And I think a lot of the reason for that is Azorius Soldiers and Selesnya Toxic are decks that are on the periphery right now. So I think that's what they have in mind there. And so yeah, I like the strategy. We are definitely going to be doing a sideboard guide on this deck today, so I don't want to give too much away. But broad strokes wise, we mentioned Rakdos, we mentioned Grixis. We'll talk about that matchup in the sideboard guide, but how do you feel about this deck if you had to face Domain? Because I think Domain is really, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I think Domain is really going to be the next threat. Do you think this deck is ready? Go ahead.
I've been trying to find a path through it, so I've been messing with Curse of Silence in the sideboard, Invasion of Gobakhan. I've gone Lorenz, extra copies in the sideboard. I think at this point I'm gonna push towards Michiko's Reign of Truth.
Okay.
And that's strictly because I need the tempo to push forward, and Domain is very much about whether they hit that 7th land before you kill them. Because if they get to Atraxa before you kill them, you better have an ossification in the win on board already, or else you're losing that game right there. And it's just a question of, can they ramp faster than you can deploy? And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it feels way too coin flippy, and their top decks are extremely powerful.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead, John Ramos.
So the question is what you're suggesting is going for the, you let them, I don't want to say let them, but basically you don't care if they curve out, they hit Atraxa and you ossification hit Atraxa and then play Michiko's on the same turn and kill them on that turn, is what you're saying basically.
Yes.
Yeah. I think Michiko's Reign of Truth is underused. I used to rely on it really heavily when this was my deck like 6 months ago. Weird to say that you play a deck in Standard 6 months back, but yeah. I think that card has a lot of power. One thing I know we talked about and discussed was Borrowed Time. I used to use Borrowed Time, Circle of Confinement in the main. This list has 4 Circle of Confinement in the sideboard, no Borrowed Time. Borrowed Time you think is way too slow, especially in light of the Domain conversation. Something like Borrowed Time goes even further back to the bottom of the line here, I think. What do you do you agree with that?
When it comes to a deck like this, like Enchantress, what I see is that if you're going to go up to 3 mana on the curve and Borrowed Time is at 3, I want it to be a haymaker. I don't want it to be an answer. Like we have Borrowed Time, we have Seal of from Existence. I tried all of these options, but this is such a tempo-focused deck that I don't think we can have answers at 3. I think all of our answers have to be 2 mana or 1 mana, and everything at 3 mana needs to be a haymaker.
That makes perfect sense. The power of Standard right now is such that you made a statement about this the other day. I think it might have been the exact same statement. It made me think like, wow, you really have to expect a lot from your 3 drops nowadays. Especially if you're playing against so much mid-range, so much tempo. Your 3 drop has to really have an impact on the board state. I think you would agree with that. Calyx,
I mean,
go ahead.
The pros discussed this at one point around the World Championship, where Grixis took it down on the back of Make Disappears, where they said there's nothing you can play at 2 that matters compared to what happens at 3, so just counter the 3 drop. And that still rings very true given the engines we have at 3. So unless we see these engines banned in the upcoming week, 3 drops will continue to define this format because the power level is just way stronger than 2.
I would also add that if you're 3, because there's a crap ton of 3s, not just the good ones, but there's also like Takastia's Welcome and a bunch of other 3s that if your 3 has to do something the moment it hits play, and that's why all of the 3s that are seeing play, that's basically what they all do. And the ones that are not doing as well are like the ones that are running these random 3s that they play and it doesn't do anything the moment it hits play. Everything that you see that is doing very well, and even in other formats too, but generally from my 3s, and I'm sure that Darkstream could say the same, if your 3 does not do something the moment it hits play and does not generate you a full thing of cardboard, the card is unplayable in Standard at the current moment.
The way I would look at it is that 2 things for a 3 drop to work in this format currently. 1, ETB, like something has to happen the turn it hits play. It doesn't have to happen immediately always, like Wedding Announcement happens on end step, but the turn it hits play, there needs to be effect. And 2, it needs to snowball your position if it's left unchecked, which is what Wedding Announcement, Calyx, Fable, Bankbuster at 2 is one of the rare exceptions, but these are all cards that snowball while also having an immediate impact. Bankbuster not having the most immediate impact, but at the same time, you can see why it gets classified up there with the rest of the 3 drops because it doesn't activate for free. So it's kind of a 2-drop that goes into the 3 curve. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of those cards and the 3-drop slot, we're about to see a ton of bans. Some people say a ton of bans. I think a few bans. Let's talk about it. 3-drop slot, Fable, right? Like, we're all agreed, Fable the Mirror Breaker is getting banned, whether, for good or bad, whether we agree with it or not. This card, a lot of power in a can. What else is getting banned before I jump into it? I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. Bankbuster, I think that comes in close second. Both of you guys, Darth Riktus, you think this card's getting banned?
So Wizards pulled both of them off the daily deals after putting them up initially this morning at 10 a.m. They had deals to get alternate art for Fable and Bankbuster. And Fire Shoes actually came out and said, really? With bans coming? And then they pulled them out of MTG Arena after that tweet, which tells me, yeah, both of those are probably getting banned. As far as what else gets banned, at a minimum, I hope Shieldred goes. And I don't say this because I hate the card. I say this because it's considered so good that it's played in Vintage. And in one of the best decks in Vintage, it is considered an alternative win condition on its own. That's a hell of a power level.
Whoa. Okay, we have to pay attention to Vintage. Really, I think that's a good marker for power level. Is does the card get play in Vintage at all? And you're telling me this does.
It does. It's Doomsday sideboard 2 of, so that when they go to like mess up your combo, you just board into 2 Shieldred, and you're like, I mean, I know you have counter spells, but all I have is 1 Shelly, and that's all I need. That's 3 turns and you're dead, and it single-handedly beats the Bazaar of Baghdad decks because they try to draw 3 cards a turn. Good luck winning against Shelly when you're drawing 3 cards a turn. So I think it needs to be banned. By that same logic, I want Atraxa out. I know everybody's had their fun with their Fallen Angel, but it's also a huge part of Vintage right now. And without it, the domain decks become a lot more interesting, a lot more dynamic. Right now, their plan is just get to Atraxa. And that's the problem I have with a lot of these peak cards is the plan is just get to this and run it all the way to the finish line. Like one card gets you there. And it's not fun. It's the same issue I had with Emergent Ultimatum, because you'd play this entire game and you'd have these advantages, these incremental back and forths, and then somebody just resolved Emergent Ultimatum, and whatever you did for the prior 6 turns didn't fucking matter, like at all. And that's not the kind of magic that I think anybody enjoys. I think people prefer a game of skill, not a game of, oh look, whoops, there we go, we're done.
I do understand that, and this is where I'm going to have a little bit of a pushback on the 7, 8, 9, 10 drops or whatever. That not saying that I don't disagree that the back and forth should matter, because they should. Combat should matter, and combat math and all that should matter. But I also understand what Wizards is saying when you're playing with 7, 8s, and 9 drops, albeit if you're playing them on curve, not so much, getting it to be played on turn 4, turn 5, which I also understand. But the game has to end. Like, the games can't go on for like 30, 35 minutes a game. So I understand what they're trying to do, but at the same time, when you're going from 2 to 4 to 7 and you're casting Atraxa on turn 4, the other thing that's annoying is they allowed it to I don't know why they just then you don't have to cast it. You can just put it into play with 4 or 5 mana, reanimating it. It should say, like, every other card that they've ever made in the last 6 months or even to 9 months to a year has been, you have to cast it. You can't just put it into play and get the effect. So whatever. But to answer the question, Fable, I don't want to go, but I understand why. It's the greatest mid-range card ever that's not named Uro. And basically that's what Fable does, is Uro, but you don't gain the life. And you don't initially gain the ramp, but it essentially ramps you. And if you kill the ramp, so be it, whatever. I just discard 2 cards I don't need, and I refuel, and I sculpt my hand the way I want. And I think the card just does too much for 3 mana. Basically what Uro did is it's the best mid-range card ever, and Fable is number 2. So it's probably a little too good for Standard. And Bankbuster, like no one saw it coming, but I mean, you just made Maze Mind Tome better. Now it's a threat. Like, I don't want these cards to go, but whatever. And if you ban Fable, you have to ban the other 3-drops, which is what we're gonna discuss also. But because
Yes.
if you ban one, you got to ban all of them. And Shieldred, I think, should go because the format is warped literally by one creature, and that's not healthy. Like, most people don't see it that way. I do, because I played with Teferi or 3-Fairy, Teferi Time Raveler. The format literally warped around one card. Can you beat this card? Can you counter this card? Or can you race it? Those are the questions. If you cannot answer them, your deck is literally tier 3 because you cannot compete. And that's basically what Shieldred is. Can you beat this card? Can you race this card? Can you do this? And if not, then you have to get rid of it. And that's basically what happened to Teferi and many other cards just like it.
I totally agree there. The thing about these 3-drop cards, especially Fable the Mirror Breaker, is that they're combo enablers. And that's why recently we were seeing so much Fable play with a combination of the Reanimator archetype, the ability to dump exactly what you need, the Atraxa in this case, and pull it off. I wanted to make a quick comment back on when we were talking about banning Atraxa possibly, that John Ramos pointed out something I think we need to highlight, which is that we used to have these big creatures, these big 7-8 drop creatures, even bigger, that had text on them that said, only when you play it from their hand do you get this ETB. I'm blanking on some of them. I think there was a huge Eldrazi that was like that. Anyway, I wish we would go back to that. And I wish that, right, we talk about this week in, week out, but I wish that the digital format of Alchemy was a playground where you could really test this. Like, make Atraxa and Alchemy say that you get to do that once it's hardcast only. And you'll stop seeing the Reanimator archetype cheaply play that sort of card in. But, yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
To be fair, the Alchemy format you're talking about is what had me excited for Alchemy once upon a time. Before they created their own cards for Alchemy, back when it was just nerfs, I thought it was interesting because then you had the ability to test out theories without banning things in standard. You could test out what happens if we nerf it just a little bit. You know, what happens if we shift these cards this way? What does standard look like? And they could have data for bans before the bans. And I thought that was the point of Alchemy, and I was all on board for that because the moment standard got stale, they would just shift Alchemy to make standard less stale. And if you enjoyed Alchemy and it was going well, you knew that standard was going to get corrected in a certain amount of time because Alchemy was all of a sudden better. But instead they put in even bigger powerhouses into Alchemy and said buy more cards. And the community mostly said no.
Yeah. They kind of tried to make it into some of these other games like Hearthstone and stuff, right? With the powerful cards. And I think that's where they failed. If they had gone the route, like you just suggested, of simply altering standard and modifying things a bit and toying with it to make a different meta, I mean, that would have required a ton of parenting on their part. I just don't think they'd wanted to put in the effort that required. And it sucks because it could have been a great product. Incidentally, we're looking on screen right now for the folks at home at the. I wanted to bring up the Alchemy meta very briefly in Best of 3 Alchemy, and it doesn't look too different from standard, except for the addition of some decks that are obviously only there because of specific cards that they released in Alchemy. And you can tell by the fact that we have 2 different versions of the Naya deck in there. We have 2 different versions of the 5-color deck, one of which is obviously just a Reanimator pile. And Grixis on the top, mono red in second. I don't doubt that. The only thing that I expect to see but don't is like mono green in there as well, because they have some powerful Alchemy stuff in green. But yeah, they certainly shook up the meta, if you want to call Alchemy like a substandard. But I don't know, man. I think they just made it a very aggro heavy sort of meta, and that's where we are now in standard. Not for the same reasons. But if you look at the standard meta, we've got some creature decks coming back, crawling up from the bottom. Boros. I would call the mono black mid range a creature deck. I would also call the mono red, a creature deck. I don't think it's a full burn. It uses the Swift Spear among some other things like Phoenix Chick. And of course, Esper Legends is there as well. What do you guys think about the shift lately towards aggro piles, especially in Mythic? I've been seeing them in Mythic. They've been getting some wins. What do you think, Darth Riktus? Does that imply anything about the meta shift we're about to see post-ban?
No, I actually think it's indicative of people trying to figure out what to do against these invoke decks and how to position. So if you look at what Grixis and Rakdos are trying to do, there are avenues to victory against them as aggro decks, and part of the avenue you're looking for is how do I diversify this threat base enough that I get around what everybody's trying to do in Rakdos and Grixis. Like, well, let's just say Grixis, Rakdos, those are the tier 1 decks, because I think at this point we can say that they are. I mean, I played so much with them and so much against them, and they are always going to be around, and we both know it. Until the bans happen, at least, they are everywhere. So then you look as an aggro player and you're like, okay, I don't want to play mirror matches and figure out who's got the better invoke deck. So what do I do to get under or over? And that's where Domain has come in huge numbers in Mythic lately. At least I've been seeing it in huge numbers. And that's where I started brewing with Abzan Legends, Esper Legends, Mono Red, Green White, trying to find the one deck that had the right angle to get around all the powerhouse cards in Rakdos and Grixis. The closest I came was Enchantress. The others feel a little bit too draw dependent in many situations, which I don't love for an aggro deck, because Rakdos and Grixis, they have ways to filter their hands. They have ways to deal with that issue. But like Green, White, Enchantress, if you looked at some of the play footage, you'll see games where I just flood out. And there's no draw discard. There's no way to get around that. If you flood, you flood. That's that. That's that game.
Yeah, I have to say, after switching it up a little bit from playing Grixis and Rakdos for a couple of weeks straight to do, sideboard guides and content and collect data, when I switched back over to Azorius Soldiers, not Esper Legends, that has Connive, but Azorius Soldiers, I played a little bit of Selesnya, I played some Boros, I played some Gruul, and yeah, you don't have Fable to fix your hand. You don't have Rono to fix your hand. You don't have Rafine. So it's an adjustment for me going back to thinking about mulligans and how many lands to put in the deck in I don't want to say an old way, but just in a way that I wasn't familiar with, because I'd been playing a totally different type of deck style for like 3 or 4 weeks. So yeah, I think that's fair to say. I just saw Lieutenant Watts. Lieutenant Watts is in here. How are you, buddy?
Hello. Fashionably late, as always.
As always, glad to have you, though. I wanted to ask you real quick what you think, because you weren't here when we were discussing this, but what you think about the Celestial Enchantments decks. And
I do run it. I do run a slightly different version than the versions we see on ladder, and probably a different version than Darth Riktus runs. He is correct in not having that card draw engine and not having that card draw filter, or the card filter can definitely be a drawback of the deck. However, I do try to mitigate that somewhat in including Tribute to the World Tree, especially with running that in combination with a Hallowed Haunting, or having a couple of Weavers out there will let you have the power that you need with your other enchantment creatures entering the battlefield to be able to draw more cards. But until you have that in place, it is very draw dependent.
I didn't even realize that Weaver double triggers Tribute.
Weaver double triggers a lot of things, my guy. It's so nice.
Bro.
I do love the Weaver version of the deck. I think that was version 2.0 back in this deck's run months back, was when people started to figure out how to use Weaver to do some crazy stuff. And that's where I was using Circle of Confinement, Borrowed Time to just knock out permanents. You'll notice the average win rate for the deck for everybody else who populates MTG Assistant is 56%, which, I consider that a really good win rate. 60% being like the golden win rate for something in Mythic. But 1.15% of the meta Selesnya enchantments. Ooh, very cool deck. I say this deck, along with a lot of other tier 1.5, tier 2 lists, are going to bump up a spot when we see tier 1's Rakdos and Grixis midrange drop down due to some bans. That's the intended message that they're trying to send here. I think is diversifying what archetypes get considered tier 1. Right off the top of your heads, guys, I'll start with Lieutenant Watts. You've been playing Celestia Enchantments. Is there anything else that you think is getting bumped up into the tier 1 or tier 1.5 slot post-ban? Is there any deck you think, based on what you think is getting banned, that we'll see a lot of success?
I definitely think that we will see 5-color and probably Esper Legends go to the top of the lists.
Okay, so yeah, you're right with me on that. I also think we're gonna see Domain and Esper Legends become the new tier 1. Darth Riktus, the Darkstream, give us your insight here. What do you think is getting bumped up, if anything?
Okay, so this is going to be completely ban dependent, but here's where I'm at with it. If Atraxa gets banned, Domain falls off a cliff a little bit. If it doesn't get banned, Domain will be a hell of a deck to try to deal with. Esper Legends, Abzan Legends will depend on Shieldred. There's a reason that deck has been as strong as it is, and it's because your 4-mana spell is the haymaker of the format. Without that spell, it changes completely what you're trying to do. You don't have the snowball effect of just get Shelly in there. Even if they kill everything else, you still win. So I don't know that it's going to actually be tier 1 once the bans happen, because if Shelly goes, we have to rethink fundamentally what goes into these decks and what we're trying to curve out into. By the same token, Green White Enchantress, if we lose Calyx, it takes a huge hit. If we lose Wedding Announcement, it still takes a pretty big hit. And both of those are potential bans. I know we haven't gotten to play much with Calyx, so it's kind of a low-grade ban, but I could see a scenario, and I'm not saying they're going to do this. I hope they do this, but I don't think they will, where they ban 15-plus cards. I would love a scenario where they just go, okay, every main engine we have seen for the last year is gone. And you have to figure out what to do without all these engines, because we could see cool cards like Takazia's Welcome. I would love to see that card see more play.
Oh
but,
yeah,
you put it up against Wedding Announcement, you know which one you're playing.
yeah. There's a lot of cards from sets that are going to be around for another year that I look and I'm like, wow, this is still in standard. Nobody's using it. And I would love a scenario where they do that. I I don't see that playing out well among the fan base. I think they don't know what's best for them sometimes. And while we would love to see that scenario, and I could see that happening, and I think that would actually be ideal given the fact that they're extending standard rotation. You would think, hey, all right, along with that, let's ban a ton of cards all at once, shake everything up. But
Well,
go ahead.
what they have the opportunity to do is rare here, because everybody kind of did a collective groan when they went to 3 years from 2 years on the rotation, but it provided a weird opportunity that they haven't really messed with, and that opportunity is to say, okay, once a year we're going to enact a large number of bans, and that way all the cards that we wanted you to play with, all of the intricacies that are in block constructed, that are in drafts, they might actually come out and be viable in standard, because we're not getting it ruined by mythics that are overpowered. Instead, we just have interesting synergies that we need to learn and exploit. And then next year, it's gone. It's kind of like you get a rotation every year, except the rotation is fuck all these stupid mythics that are screwing up the power level. Let's see what happens without them. That would
Yep.
be more interesting on a 3-year rotation.
They could have done that already. Like they could have done that when the rotation happened, and just since they already announced that they didn't design wilds and everything else to be with the last 4 sets that are still in. So they could have just let rotation happen, because they probably knew that. Well, they didn't know this at the time, but when they announced it, they're like, "Well, we didn't expect to do it right now, but we're going to. But we didn't design that. We don't foresee a problem." And then 2 weeks later, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna have to ban some stuff." So it's like you could have just rotated. You could have rotated all the cards that are problems already, and then just said, all right, now from wilds all the way on is 3 years, and you already had the rotation and all that. Unless they really wanted like 200 or however many cards are still in after the bans. Like, I understand, but at the same time, it's like you didn't design these with the idea that you were going to have them for another year. So you could have done that and then designed the next, 4, 8 sets or however long they're in, with the idea that, wilds is going to be in for an extra year. So I don't know.
Let's talk about what some of these other cards we're going to speculate on are. I know spots 1 and 2, I think priority-wise go to Fable and Reckoner Bankbuster, just because they're in every deck. If they're not Fable, they're Bankbuster and they're in every deck. Number 3, I think, goes to a tie between Sheldred and Invoke Despair. Sheldred because it actually probably needs to be banned to just release the aggro archetype from jail. But Invoke Despair, just because of how, as Luis Dragon has said many times, how oppressive that card can be at the end of the game or in the middle of the game. But also because it's the fan favorite to get banned, right? I may not necessarily agree with it, but it is definitely so it's probably going to get banned. So I think those 4 right off the bat. What are some other sort of lesser known cards that you think deserve the chopping block as well? John Ramos, what are your opinions on this? Is there anything beyond those 4?
Really, I don't even think Invoke is that bad. Like, I played Mono White before Brothers War. Actually, I played Mono White with Brothers War because I was hella high on Steel Seraph before everybody else was. And like the problem card that I always had a problem with was Sheldred. Can I beat Sheldred? Can I race it? And if I didn't, this is why I was playing Mono White, because I had the most ways to deal with it. Clean answers, 1 and 2 mana, I didn't care. Anything else? No, because the majority of the problems is a systematic issue. You have all these 3-drops for all the colors, and virtually every color that is tier 1 right now has a 3-drop. Rakdos has Fable, Esper has Rafine, and White has Wedding Announcement. The only one that doesn't have anything is green. And really that's Calyx, but green white is mostly white cards with some green splashes. So like and then all the monocolors besides black, but no one's really playing those because you got double color. So outside of Invoke, which is fringe bannable at this point, I don't see anything else. But if we're going with the Darthstream's idea that we're going to ban 15 cards, hey, look, Mono White, you're losing Farewell and
Woo! Let's go.
You're losing Farewell and Wedding Announcement. Esper Legends, you're losing Rafine and Sheldred. Rakdos, you're losing Bankbuster, Fable, also Sheldred, incidentally enough. And there's no blue card that all the good draw spells are in colorless or red or black. So there ain't no blue spells that I'm irritated at.
Flow of knowledge, you're out of here.
Please. But green, man, they just need to just emergency put a 3-drop in there.
They really do.
Green, terrible.
We need a mini Elder Gargaroth in the 3-drop slot.
Bruh.
I would add a few pieces to this. One, white needs to lose Wandering Emperor. It's been a staple for too long.
Oh yeah,
it should go.
Card is so good.
And
so good.
And I mean, green does have Tribute to the World Tree, which we've seen how explosive that can be in Devotion and in mono green aggro and Explorer. I think it could really shine without Invoke keeping it in check, which is why I think Invoke needs to go, because all these enchantment draw engines that all these different colors get, like Takesia's Welcome, Tribute to the World Tree, they just suck when you get invoked.
That's fair. I didn't think about Tribute, but the card's actually good.
Yeah, I mean, it forces a mono-green dynamic mostly. I mean, you can splash one other color, kind of. It's a little bit rough, but you can pull it off, as I think Lieutenant Watts has been doing with that in Disney Enchantments. Braver man than I. Well done, Lieutenant. But I don't know. I'd like to see some of these other engines start to shine, and I think in order to do that, you have to get rid of at least 5 to 6 cards if you really want to see a new standard, and if you get rid of less than that, you're just shuffling around which archetypes matter.
Yeah, Lieutenant Watts, jump in on this. What else is out there? What else do you see getting banned?
I mean, I think we've really covered the major ones that are going to get banned. Like Darkstream said a few minutes ago, we might see lesser known cards like Calyx get banned because they are powerful. And if you're going to say, well, Shellys have to go. Well, if you're looking at Calyx in an enchantment deck or in an enchantment even-esque deck, like it's as powerful as Shelly, if not more powerful.
Is Calyx is Calyx seeing play in any other formats right now, guys? Do y'all know?
I don't really play outside of Standard, so I don't know.
Historic maybe, but no. Not really, no.
It's fringe played in Historic. I've seen a few different people try it. I've seen people fail to use it correctly in Explorer, and I don't know if it'll have a home in Explorer. It's definitely not powerful enough for anything older formats, though.
we don't have the 1-drops in Explorer. That's why you don't see the deck, because we don't have the Scout or the other Hexproof Bro, because we only have the blue one, and there's no green or white when we don't have a Glade Cover Scout or any of the white drops. So that's why you don't see the deck in Explorer.
Oh, you want Calyx and Boggles. Got it.
Yeah, that's why you don't see it. But it would be like a 4-color list with Calyx, Light Paws, and a bunch of stuff. But you have to have the hexproof 1-drops, and you don't have them in Explorer.
That's fair. I could see it making an impact in an Auras deck, like Boggles, etc., depending on what gets printed and what moves around. But right now, I haven't seen anybody use it correctly, so whether it exists or not remains to be seen.
What if any shifts in Explorer occur post ban? Do we see any bans for Explorer? Do we see this impacting Explorer in any way? No.
No. So like Pioneer's in a good spot right now, and Explorer mirrors that. So the only difference between Explorer and Pioneer right now is you don't have obviously half the cards, but the majority of the decks that are in Pioneer outside of the blue decks and a few others, like you basically have 3 decks, which I've said many times is blue, white, mono green, and Rakdos. For some reason, blue, white, and mono green are just not that popular. And there's only one, in my opinion, tier 1.5 deck. The rest are tier 2. And that's Sacrifice. I've been playing that a lot, and as I've said before, Obnixilus solves a lot of your problems. It doesn't solve all of them, but it solves a lot of your issues. And the difference between Explorer and Pioneer is that for some reason, creativity. I don't understand how people are winning with creativity in these formats. I really don't. Because every time I play it and play against it, like the deck just wins one game and it doesn't win matches. And it has such an atrocious Rakdos matchup. Like I understand I'm not a professional, but I don't know how you're winning 7 to 8 round challenges or top 8ing these events with this deck. Like I'm telling you, the Atraxa versions. And maybe it's because my build's different, like than everybody else's, like the decks that I'm playing to beat this deck just because it's so annoying. But it feels like a worse, Greasefang deck to me. But because it's like you're trying to combo, but the issue is you have to actually like, keep your stuff in play and have to untap with it. Greasefang, you don't have to do that. So there's not really that much. Pioneer is seeing an aggro deck in Boros Convoke that's starting to get highly popular, like exploding right now, because it feels a lot like Hogak, where they assemble like 14 to 16 power on turn 2 and then kill you on turn 3. But other than that, there's not really, and you don't get to play that deck in Explorer because we don't have Bushwhacker. So
okay. I was going to ask about mono white humans. I've been seeing that populate the heck out of ladder. What is going on with that deck? I feel like it's a counter to mono green devotion. Am I right in that?
So,
what's going on?
Yeah. Well, the main staple that it got is what is it called? I don't even remember what this stupid thing is called. I know it has ward. Oh wait. What the heck?
Copper Coat Vanguard is the name of the card. It is a
So Copper Gloat Vanguard, can't even say it, is the new edition. And what you do with it is you play Skrelv on 1 or just a random 1-drop. You play Thalia on 2, and then you play Copper Gloat Vanguard on 3. And you just say good luck, because like your 1 and 2 mana removal spells don't mean anything, because basically the humans are making your stuff taxed, and it really makes all of your turns awkward. So because everything gets ward, so you have to kill this, is in the Vanguard first, or Thalia, whichever one. And then you have to hope they don't have Skrelv. And then if they have Skrelv and Coppergoat and Thalia, and then they play, Adeline, unless you have a sweeper, you're dead. Because you don't have enough removal spells to deal with it.
Yeah, Adeline, and then I'll see Thalia's Lieutenant and Luminarch Aspirant on the turn after Adeline. Yeah, there's a curve to this deck, and it's pretty nasty if you're playing any kind of removal, Rakdos especially, or mono green, where you're just trying to curve out and not even care what your opponent's doing, and all of a sudden you look over and they've got a board full of stuff with ward.
Well, I think that's why mono green isn't seeing play that much, because there's a lot of, I'm not saying the deck's bad, but basically mono green is more of a litmus test than it is for Rakdos or any other deck, is because mono green is the turn 4, turn 5 deck. And the question is can you beat them? And mono white can, but unless they have the nut draw and they're on the draw, or excuse me, ipso facto, I said that backwards. If mono green is on the play and you're on the draw, mono green has the nut draw, you don't win. But they have to have the nut draw and to beat your above average draw as mono white. And the rest of the format is what beats mono green. Rakdos has a 50-50 matchup, and if their deck is built with mono green in mind, then it's hard for mono green to win a match. Like, Rakdos is favored, and a lot of the other decks give mono green problems. Creativity gives it problems. Mono white gives it problems. A new Boros deck gives it issues. So mono green is seeing and it's the same in Explorer, and really that's the only deck that I've seen that has fallen off a lot. It is not. I don't want to say it's not tier 1 anymore, but basically it's the lowest of the tier 1s of all the tier 1s.
Is it fair to say it's kind of a rock paper scissors situation between Rakdos, mono green, and mono white right now in Explorer?
No, because you also have blue white, and then you have mono white, and then you have blue or mono green, then you have Rakdos, and then there's some other decks that give some of those decks fits, but out of the tier 1s there's 4 decks, and really 3, but there's a couple that could possibly take the spot in tier 1-5 or tier 1. It's just the top 3 decks are not rock paper scissors anymore because there's so many other decks. If it was just those decks, then so be it. But I think there's stuff that hit the tier 1.5, or they're possibly tier 1 and we're just not giving them enough respect. And I think the changes to mono white push it into that, because for a while when they weren't playing the Vanguard, it was just kind of can you deal with their first 2 drops? And if you do, the game's over. That's why mono white is so bad. But Coppergoat gives it a lot of staying power, because you have to deal with Thalia, and if you play Coppergoat, you have to kill the Coppergoat. If you don't, then after you've killed those two pieces of cardboard where you spent all of your mana to do so on turn 2 and turn 3, well, you don't have any more removal spells probably. So now they have Adeline, and then if they're playing Knight of Aaron Eos, they just draw 2 more cards, and they're beating you on the board now. So it might be tier 1 again. So now you have 4 decks, and if there's more creature decks in the format, that means Sacrifice is a good deck now. So that means it's tier 1. And then all their sideboard slots are all dedicated to the blue decks, which is what I'm doing. So you lose game 1, but your sideboard plan is so good against the control decks that you don't care if you lose game 1, because you're probably going to win on the play. And then generally your average draw beats their above average draw because you have Thoughtseize and Go Blanks and Obnixilis.
Yep.
So
yeah, I think the data bears a lot of the things that you've pointed out in the Explorer meta right now. If you take a look just at the MTG assistant stuff, we're starting to see aggro lists populate sort of the tier 2 slot and actually get a decent win rate compared to some of the control lists like Azorius. And yeah, it bears what you've been saying. So that's my only comment on the Explorer meta. I think we've talked about and covered a lot of ground today, guys. Are there any final comments that you want to make regarding anything we've discussed? Bans, Selesnya Enchantment's doing amazing. Basically being the best deck there in a field of mid-range. I think it just speaks to a lot of what we've been saying over the past few weeks regarding bans and how they should really be a last resort. Those are going to be my final comments, but does anybody else want to speak on anything we've talked about today?
If this is usually what happens. Like, I understand that people want cards ban and, you know, maybe, possibly, but this is what I was talking about earlier in other casts, where it's a last resort, because this is what happens, where everybody's preparing for the mirror and they're not caring about anything else because all they think is this is the best deck and there's nothing else that can compete. And then out of nowhere, I know it didn't happen in a PT, but this is sort of like a PTQ, where you play against 100 players or in a tournament of like 6-7 rounds where it's a bigger PTQ, and somebody comes in not caring about Rakdos or Grixis and says, I'm going to play something that I know has a good matchup against it, and I know that's all I'm going to see. And then they go and they run it, and then the deck's not good anymore because people are prepared for it. But that means that it opens the meta again because they're not preparing for just 1 or 2 decks, and they have to actually prepare for everything.
Yep.
So this is what happens when meta shifts because of 2 to 3 weeks where there's nothing else, and it's just Rakdos, Grixis, and, you know, Invoke decks or whatever. And then a deck out of nowhere comes in and just basically just runs the tournament because that's all they face. This is what happens. And like, this is what causes metas to shift, and you have to give it time.
Yeah.
But if you don't, then this is what's going to happen. You're going to have like 3 or 4 cards banned. So
yeah, exactly. This stuff takes time. And I think in the digital age, in the modern Magic age, we've sort of gotten impatient and gotten away from waiting to see how the natural meta shifts occur. That's how I feel as well. Darth Riktus, the Dark Stream, you actually played the darn thing. I know we're not sending out the message that Celestia Enchantments is the deck to play, but it definitely bears some of the truths that we've been saying about bans. How do you feel regarding what John Ramos just said?
I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, I'm just excited to see some bans. I know it should be last resort. I get that, but I'm excited to see everything get shaken up, and that's all I really have to say at this point, because I'm waiting to see what happens. You know.
Yeah, that's the flip side of that coin is if you're not tunnel visioned to tournament, to high competitive play, then if you're an everyday player who just goes to the Friday nights and you want standard to fire, then bans are probably a good thing for the overall, for everybody involved. So, okay, we do have to balance the fact that, you know, the meta shifts all the time with the fact that it doesn't shift for everybody all the time. and we can't forget that. Lieutenant Watts, what are your final thoughts? How are you feeling about the bans? How are you feeling about the way things are moving in Standard?
I'm actually really excited for the bans. I agree with the Dark Stream. I'm ready to see Standard like truly shaken up. I'm ready to see some of these powerhouse cards that are in every deck to just go bye-bye for a little while. And like, we'll still have access to them in our other formats, and if we want to go play some jank, then we'll go and play jank. But like, Standard isn't the place for jank. So.
You might be right, and yeah, you might be right about that. Jank has to be able to live there, but it can't thrive. Then you have something wrong.
I can go play around with my jank, but I don't expect to win with it.
Oh, that's what she said. All right, guys, we're going to end on that note. Thank you guys for watching MTG Rebelcast Episode 7. We covered a lot of ground. If you disagree with us, feel free to comment about it down in the comments. Also, feel free to hit up the MTG Rebellion on Twitter. And that's it from all of us at The Rebellion. Don't forget to untap, upkeep, resist.
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 Peace out, everybody.
Good night, y'all.